The very last words of the book of Matthew are an assurance given to the followers of Christ, given to His church, even though His church had not been established as of that point. It wouldn't be too long between that point, where it's, from His resurrection, to where He would ascend into heaven, and then would be the day of Pentecost. But He gives an assurance, and it's assurance that goes all the way through time. And it's very simple what He says. He says, "And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. Amen." Even to the end of the world. That is a promise. And that word lo means behold or watch. Watch and see it happen, because it's going to happen. Watch and see that this is what is going to happen, because He's going to show Himself to be true to those words all the way through the centuries. He's going to do it. And we can say, well, what about Stephen? What about him? It doesn't take us very long going from the beginning of the church in Acts chapter 2 to Acts chapter 7, and Stephen has been stoned to death. What about him? There are going to be martyrs along the way. Jesus didn't say there wouldn't be death. And He didn't say, matter of fact, He said just the opposite. And He didn't say there would be no persecutions, because He said just the opposite. There would be persecutions. But even with persecutions, He is with us always. With a Stephen who dies, or with the Antipas who dies, or with any martyr for Christ who dies, Christ is on the other side. And with the stoning of Stephen, Stephen sees the Son of God. He sees Jesus standing. Personally, I believe He is standing for Stephen. Not just appearing for him, but standing, because Stephen is the first martyr in his church. At least the first one recorded for us. And certainly there isn't another that brought as much of an impact in the church as his did when the church spreads out of Jerusalem, except for the apostles. They stay. Now, Jesus gives His assurance that's going to happen. This evening we're going to look at the providence of God, because the providence of God does not stop. Now, miracles on this earth, they have stopped. But just because miracles have stopped doesn't mean that God plays no part in our lives or no part in human history, because He does. It's just we see it in hindsight only, or just with very good guesses, I suppose. But I'm just going to tell you from a personal point of view, it's with hindsight with me, of where I see certain things have happened, then I realize that was the providence of God that brought that about. Didn't know what it was when it was occurring, but it was the providence of God that brought it about. And the people being guided by it, people's lives being affected by it, and it is there. Let's go to Genesis chapter 45. Genesis 45, we're looking at the end of all the ill that went into the life of Joseph. And there was so much that occurred to him. It went from bad to worse to, and yes, it's a word, look it up, worser. Okay. It went bad, we'll just say that. And then suddenly it turned around. But God had brought it about for a reason. He brought it about for a reason. But we see this. Joseph, and we'll get there in just a second, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. They're the ones that did it. And prior to that, he had visions concerning, well, really everyone could interpret it. It was so easy, you didn't have to have a Daniel to interpret it. His brothers knew that, are we going to be bowing down to you? And even his father asked the question, are your mother and I going to be bowing down to you? What's the meaning? They knew what the meaning of those dreams were. They knew what they were. And here we see where all this transpired for a reason, because something very big was going to be happening, and Joseph is going to be the solution for it. And God put this into motion years earlier, and it is years earlier, so that Joseph is in the right place to where Joseph is going to be benefiting Egypt and his family and a lot of other nations. And let's just put it into complete context for everybody. And this was you have the 7 years of just bumper crop. Huge crop. Best years imaginable. Followed by 7 years of nothing. It's famine. And actually, when Joseph interprets those dreams, you have the 7 years of famine are going to affect the world. Indeed, it did. I don't know how far away it occurred, but here, I guess it was just a few months ago, I was watching it's a course. I do watch courses online, and this happened to be, she's not a Christian. She doesn't believe in the Bible. She would rarely even speak of the Bible, even though she was speaking of things from the Mesopotamia and ancient Mesopotamia. Only when she had to, and reluctantly, would she ever talk about anything concerning the Bible, and that what was being found actually confirmed what the Bible had already said. She's not about to say that, but she was saying it without realizing it. She did make note of that there had to have been some terrible famine in the past. That there had to have been some very terrible famine that had occurred. Well, she's talking about what happened with under Joseph. Joseph is in Egypt, and the famine evidently was more than just in Egypt and in Palestine. It went further than that. But this is what Joseph says. So we begin in verse 3. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence, because they knew what they did. And not all of them were guilty of it, but there were a number of them that they knew what they did. And they would be dismayed, because the first thing they would be thinking is, it is vengeance time. It is time for him to do his worst. But that's not what he's going to do. That's not what he's going to do. Joseph doesn't have a mind, and this is a different lesson, but Joseph doesn't have a mind of vengeance. Joseph is using this situation for the reason God brought it about. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry. Because you would have those that would be grieved that they did it, and others that would be angry that it was done. Don't be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years, so it's just 2 years have passed, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. He is now using his position precisely for the point at which he was placed there. Now, we've made mention of this before. Joseph could have, now he doesn't. He doesn't, because it actually says that he did remember in time, but it was considerably later in time. Joseph could have remembered those visions from earlier when he was young. He could have remembered those visions, and considered them that this has yet to happen and it's going to happen. That God actually has given me assurance that I'm going to live long enough to see this happen. However it turns out, however we get there, it's going to happen. He could have, but he doesn't. But neither is he someone who just strikes out in vengeance and he says, it was the providence of God that did this. Oh, yeah, you did it, granted, yes. But it's the providence of God that guided in all of this. Now let's go back to chapter 37. Chapter 37, beginning in verse 26. And this is the point at which they are selling him into slavery. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? All right, because they were going to kill him. They were going to kill Joseph. They were tired of him. They were jealous of him. He was the one that it was obvious. He was the favorite of their father. It is obvious to that. And they got tired of the special treatment. They got tired of the dreams, though Jacob had nothing to do with those dreams. What profit is it? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. So they sell him to the Ishmaelites. The Midianites, which they're called here, the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. And that's the last they see of him until we get to where they're coming in during the famine. There are years. There are intervening years in there where Joseph goes through an extremely difficult time. Meanwhile, they're getting married, they have children, and their father grieves bitterly for what he believes to be a dead son. But the son's not dead. Joseph, his story, his adventure is very, very different. And he does have an adventure. And the things that he went through and finally turned out to be a solution to a problem no one knew was there yet, but God did. God knew there was going to be a problem, and he had a solution already in place. He's already in Egypt. We just have to get him to that point. The time has got to pass till we get to the point of the enormous crops. We got to get him to that point. And God does. Now, next one in this is, let's go to the book of Esther. Esther is also an extremely good example to show that God puts a solution in place before anyone knows there's a problem, before anyone's even aware of it. All is good, and God's already got a solution in place. And it's Mordecai who is telling Esther, she is queen now. She has the ear of the king. She is able to do something that no other person really was in place to do, that one could figure. There's a man by the name of Haman. He's a very powerful man, and he was determined to, it's called genocide, to kill all the Jews. That was the idea, to kill all the Jews. And Mordecai has a message that goes to Esther, and it's not a plea of helplessness. It's a command to do what you can do. That's what it is. And also saying that if you don't, help will come from somewhere. It's going to come from somewhere. But maybe this is why you're there. So verse 13, Esther chapter 4, verse 13, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. You're not going to escape this. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. Now, he doesn't know where that would be, but Mordecai has faith in God that God will preserve the Jews. He's going to do it. Mordecai can know that not just from guessing, but that the prophets have been writing that. The prophets have been saying these very things. Those such as Ezekiel, as we read just this morning, of Daniel, of Jeremiah, they've all been saying these things. And earlier prophets at that were saying these things. So there's going to arise, there will be deliverance for the Jews that come from some other place if you do not do this. So you decide. But if things get bad, you're not going to escape this. But you and your father's house will perish if you don't do this. If you're completely silent, relief and deliverance will occur, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows, here it is, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And I think actually Mordecai could have reworded that of, I feel sure this is why you're there. I feel very positive this is why you happen to be there. Now, as it turns out, Esther does precisely what only she could do and walk away from. Walk away alive. She does it. And she'd be about the only human being who could have done it. Mordecai certainly couldn't have done it, but Mordecai knows if she doesn't do it, it's going to come from somewhere. God's going to bring a deliverer somewhere, as He always did in the days of the judges. There's a deliverer out of nowhere. You have out of nowhere, there's a Gideon. Out of nowhere, there's a Samson. Out of nowhere, you have someone who's going to deliver them. And in this case, it's an Esther. And Haman's plans are completely destroyed. And everything he had planned is turned on its head. I could use another illustration, blown out of the water, or another metaphor, just blown out of the water. Now, let's go now to the New Testament. We go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 18. And this is, I'm sorry, I don't want to be there. I want to be in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 18. If you find 1 Corinthians 18, tell me. This has to do with Corinth. That's why I got the book in there. This has to do with Corinth, and it's Paul in Corinth. And Corinth was a place that was rather wicked. Matter of fact, to call someone, in those days, to call someone Corinthian is to call them morally corrupt. Someone who's Corinthian is just really hedonistic, just someone in and out of bed with people. It's just, that's what someone who's a drunk. That is all in what it means to be Corinthian. They had a lot of wickedness imported into that port. Now, the Lord, so we're in verse 9, Acts 18, verse 9. Now the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision. Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not keep silent, for I am with you. All right, that's been an assurance already in Matthew. Now, Paul wasn't there at the time, but the statement from Matthew applies to him too, as it applies to us. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in this city. All right. What does Jesus mean by many people in this city? Because the church has not really started yet. Who could that possibly be? Who could be there that could be His people in this city? Well, it is people, first off, who will not subvert righteousness, but allow it to exist. They will, in fact, engender righteousness. While who knows what they are personally, they're still going to protect innocent life, and they're still going to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. They're still going to do it. And he's going to use a pagan proconsul, or, well, a Gentile proconsul, to protect Paul from the Jews who wanted to punish him, and punish him greatly. So, verse 11, and he continued there a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia. Now, we've not covered this yet in the life of Paul. But as we were making mention, this is an aside, as we were making mention this past week, the writer of Acts, whoever you think he happens to be, and I'm talking to the skeptics out in the world, whoever you think he happens to be, it's Luke, but whoever you think he happens to be, you have to admit that whoever wrote the book of Acts knew the first century Roman world. Because you have very small details like this, as we were saying on Wednesday. If you were to fake this, if you were trying to fake this, you could get the Caesars right, and you could get some rather major individuals right. But getting the proconsul of this city of Corinth at this particular time, who knows how many proconsuls they'd had, okay? And I couldn't name you, I couldn't give you the list of mayors for Decula. I couldn't do that for you. But here, the writer, who is Luke, knew who the proconsul was because he's there. But when Paul was about to when Gallio, verse 12 again, when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, "This fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." Okay. You're taking this to a Gentile. And when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes, O Jews, there would be reason why I should bear with you. But if it's a question of words and names and your own law, look to it yourselves, for I do not want to be a judge of such matters." And he drove them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greek took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things. Here is Paul, and the work at Corinth is being protected here. He's already been there for a year and a half, and now they're trying to be rid of him. But here is this man Gallio, who would have known that he would have been one of those who are what Jesus says, many people in this city. I have many people in this city. And that would be one of them. Even though, does Gallio ever obey the truth? I don't know that he does. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But that's what Jesus is referring to. That there would be people who would respond to the gospel, yes. There would be people also that would defend the right for someone to preach the gospel. And for someone to decide to be a Christian and worship God as we're supposed to. Now, let's go to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12 I regard as like a Rosetta Stone in the middle of the book. Because Revelation chapter 12 is history. It's not prophecy. It's still put in apocalyptic language, but this is history with, prophecy toward the end of it. And these assurances, same assurances like with what Christ gave. Just watch. I'm with you all the way to the end of the world. Watch. Just behold. Just witness it. Just witness it. But in this particular chapter, we have several individuals in the vision. We have the woman, she's clothed in light. We have her child, who we can know pretty quick, once we see that the child would rule all nations with a rod of iron in verse 5, and the child was caught up to God in His throne, well, we know who that is. Well, presumably we should know who that is, because we have places such as Psalm 2, and places such as Daniel, and Daniel 7, and also Acts chapter 1. We know who was caught up to God and His throne. And we know who it is that has a rod of iron, who rules all nations with that rod. We know who that is. But there's also the dragon. And the dragon is in vision given to us in this huge, menacing creature that hates the woman, hates the child, hates God, hates everything that's good. And we don't have to guess about that one either, because it's told to us who he is. Verse 9, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Okay, so we know who he is. Now, let's discuss the woman. Who is the woman? Who is the one that gives birth to this child? Well, this we can understand pretty quick. This is not Mary, though she does literally give birth to him. This is larger than Mary. These happen to be the righteous who are there prior to Jesus being born, and the righteous after Jesus ascends into heaven. The righteous are the righteous. Beforehand, they're following the laws of God, different set of laws, law of Moses. Afterwards, the law of Christ. And we see in verse 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God. So in this part where the child has been caught up to God, we can know that this woman now represents the church. We can know that. She represents the righteous, and that she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. She's going to be taken care of. Now, we have this idea of 3.5 years, and it's this idea of 3.5 that can be found actually repeated through the book of Revelation. But it is the notion in this, actually the assurance that God is taking care of her. Well, all right, the woman fled into the wilderness. When did that happen? When did that happen? Actually, we've already made mention of it. Stephen is killed, and you have members of the church that spread out. They go into the wilderness, as it were. They leave Jerusalem, and they're found everywhere. They go, as we have already seen in the life of Paul, they've gone into Philistia. They've gone into Syria. They've gone into Cilicia, such as Tarsus of Cilicia. They've gone into various places. That's where they're going into Cyprus, where Barnabas is from. They're going into all those places. And with this, God takes care of them. This is not miraculous. Now, this is all in vision, so it sounds rather fantastic, but it's the providence of God. The providence of God takes care, He takes care of His church. He takes care of the righteous. Now, we skip from there and we go to verse 13. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Once again, that's not Mary per se. This is the church. This is the church. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now, this is saying basically the same thing that we saw from verse 6. It's just worded a different way. She's able to escape. She's able to leave the powers that were in Jerusalem that would have killed them all if they could. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed from his mouth. So here is the second attack. All right, he can't do it one way, so he's going to try to do it another way. And here is this flood that's coming out of the serpent's mouth. But whatever the meaning of that is. But what is being taught in it is that no matter what Satan can throw at the church, whatever Satan can throw at the righteous, God's going to take care of it. He's going to take care of it. And it's to where, as we have said most recently, Satan wins nothing. He is the greatest loser of all time. He wins nothing. He can't destroy the church. If he could, he would have done it for a century. But he can't. He has tried. And he continues to do that. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Well, who is that? That's the faithful, obviously. That's the faithful. Does God protect us from such power? Well, here he tells us in, yes, apocalyptic literature, yes, he does. But he's told us in very clear language, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Even to the end of the world. And I read from the New King James, that last word, the last words actually are amen. That's the last word. But end of the age, that word age really should be translated world. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are in the last age. Beginning with the death of Christ is the last age. But what is to be gained by this? Strength and assurance, to be encouraged, to know that Christ does keep His promises. And we can rest absolutely assured in that we can have faith that He's going to take care of us, He's going to take care of the church. Things will continue on. While people can fail Christ, Christ will fail no one. While some congregation might fail Christ, and too many have, Christ will always be faithful to those who belong to Him. He always will. And Christ will bring about the solution to any problem before the problem even is known about, before the problem even raises its head. He already has the solution for it. We can take heart in that and rest assured that His love is on us, and that He who has all power, all authority and all power will do whatever He wills to do. And He will help His church. And the word continues on to the next heart out there. It continues on to this day. We ask, and it's the plea of the gospel, that we look toward it and understand the hope that we have, understand the advantages that we have. Every spiritual blessing in Christ is there. Every spiritual blessing. And those are not minor little things. Those are enormous. As we made mention this morning, you might not have everything you could want on this earth, but you're going to have more than you could possibly imagine in the next. Beyond your imagination. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. Every bit of it is worth it. And having Christ as protector is no small matter. He is far greater than anyone else. We ask this evening that we look at our own lives. We ask that we look at the words given to us and gain strength, gain courage. And this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you come as we stand and sing.